When people hear the term space medicine, some people have very narrow definition of it. But honestly, it wasn't until a little bit into my medical career, when I was actually digging into it, that I realized it's actually quite a large encompassing area that's actually really important to the future of space. So I think briefly, you can kind of break, how my work as a practicing physician kind of falls into the space medicine, space healthcare sector, right? So first is, as the clinical practice of medicine. So I work in the emergency department or emergency room. And so day to day, I provide medical care. So as you know, people in space will also require medical care. So a lot of it is about translating what we do on Earth to what we do in space. And as more people are in space, that needs to expand a lot more. So there's a whole group of very dedicated physicians whose practice of medicine is to look after astronauts in space. So that's clinical practice, that's one. The second part is even bigger, is the research of medicine in space. So, the human body, as some of you may know, behaves very differently in space because of microgravity, exposure to radiation, just to name quite a few. So it's actually a tremendous challenge for humans to be in space for a long period of time. And that's where we're eventually going, right? And even if we were to do an explore mission to Mars, there's a lot of, challenges that we still need to overcome. So there's a very dedicated community of physicians and health medical researchers whose job is to solve those big challenges. And many of the space agencies have big programs on this, trying to kind of solve this. And it's a very, very fascinating area of research. And there's twofold out of the outcomes of this. One is directly benefiting, future astronauts who are going to space. But the other one is, because we're doing things that are understanding that's improving the understanding of our human body, that benefit goes straight back down to Earth. And so that's how, improvements in healthcare actually has come from, space itself. And then I think the third and final thing is how the extension of the healthcare and the life sciences industry in space, in a future space economy. And that's one thing that actually excites me a lot, is because, eventually for us to have, people working, living in space, life sciences and healthcare industry is a big part of our economy, and that will eventually also go to space. I don't have a thing right at the start to say, oh, I want to do space medicine when I was 5. But what I did have was I just was always fascinated about space. And I was actually, went into medicine, not knowing anything about how to make those two work. I always have a passion, but hey, I actually, that my career, I started in engineering and then I went into medicine. But, I went through medical school actually not knowing that there was the whole thing of space medicine. It wasn't actually until my last year of medical school when somebody say, oh, I know you're a space nerd, but hey, do you know there's this thing about space medicine? And it was just so happened that there was a big international conference on aerospace and space medicine in Australia at the time. That's where I grew up. And I was like, and this is what my friend showed me. It's like, hey, have you heard of this conference? And so I went, and that's when I actually found that there's a community of people who are actually dedicated to this all across the world. And it's not a very big community, but it's a pretty strong community. And you'll find people like that all across the world. And really, it wasn't until I realized right then that that was something that existed. And I was really drawn to it, right? This was an opportunity, a chance to tie two of my passions together, one in space, one in medicine. And the people were really, truly amazing. So I think my start in knowing where the field, in the field itself, started with knowing that it existed and then becoming part of that field and actually growing with it. No topic is too unique, right? Like over this period of time in the space industry, I've learned there's a group of people who's interested in space biology. There's a group of people who are fascinated with space nutrition. There's people who are into space archaeology. Like there's a lot of variety out there. You just have to find new people. So, my path is a professional path that is very much about depth, right? Like as a physician, as a researcher, it's all about being an expert in a certain field. And this is, I guess, would be similar to somebody who's, going to a PhD and science and research. However, that being said, there is something really important I think I learned along the way in my career is that's good, but you need to know how to fit it to the rest of where the industry or the sector is growing. And I think this is where, I think to your point, where knowing a little bit about your industry and knowing how the space business side works is truly very important. So for me, I think I really learned about the bigger part of the space industry through being with Space Generation Advisory Council, because here was just a group of people that are just anywhere from the space sector industry and with a really wide variety of backgrounds. And the only shared thing with all of us is that we just love space. And through that group of people, you learn that, the space industry is such a multi-dimensional, multi-sector, multi-facet thing, and that there's a lot of amazing people doing interesting things. And then also you learn a little bit about where the trends of the industry is going, right? So when I finished engineering, went to medical school, we were at the end of like the shuttle era. And there was this whole period where we were very much, could not go, like there's no space access. But from where I started medical school to when I finished my residency, reusable launches was a thing, right? The access to space was all changed. So kind of like staying in touch with the space world and knowing where that's going, I think it's very important. And that helps kind of fit where, I guess, what I wanted to do and where I want to go in the future, as part of the bigger industry. That's quite a hard one. Yeah, it's but I think one thing that I can keep coming back to is that at the end of the day, the most important thing is about people. It's the people you work with, the people you interact with, it's the people in the community. And let me illustrate that with a bit of an example, right? So my final year in engineering, our final year project was to launch a ramjet in the Australian desert. And there was the team from my university, and there's a team from a different university, and we met at a sounding rocket launch site. And so I met some of the folks there, and kept up with some of the friendships. And then I finished, went to med school, was deep in medicine, and then like wanted to figure out and then discover space medicine, and then like how do I get back into the space industry, right? So I didn't know. I had no idea, and I really don't know anybody who's doing that, except when I traveling through I guess Facebook, that's how you keep contact those days. I was like, oh no, hey, this person I met, who was also on the different university launching the ramjet. They had a really successful career that's probably like legendary, like envy of anybody who was graduating from space engineering in Australia, where back then there was no opportunities, right? That person went overseas, developed a career, and eventually went to work for ESA as Eurocom, right? For an Australian, that's like, legend status. And so I knew that person. So I hit up the person. It's like, can we have a brief chat? I'd love to know what you think. How do I get back to space industry? And had this amazing, very motivational discussion. And then she gave me some really helpful advice. One of which was to join SJAC, because I was like, you need to find your community of people, know what the industry is about, learn about the space world, to kind of find where to go from there. And that's what I did. And 8 years later, I'm the chair of this organization. But I credit a lot of my learning and growth in the industry with this community of people that I grew with at SG. That's really kind of how I found my direction in a field, especially where there's really no career path or well-trodden path. Especially in space medicine, everybody does it very, very differently. So I think and then I think 2 or 3 years ago we caught up again, and it was really amazing to kind of see over probably 15 years, like not a very close friend, but a very strong connection, and that's kind of really how people can really help push you in the right direction, or like a gentle nudge is what kind of make your career go the right way. And I can think of plenty more examples like that. But I think at the end of the day, career is a very long thing. And it's the people that really make it a real highlight on that journey. I have to say the most exciting part, especially in the recent, let's say, 2 or 3 years, has really been the growth of commercial space and the commercial space sector. I think really seeing a lot of companies really get a start in establishing themselves and offering services that the whole intent is to really create an ecosystem for a space-based economy, in the cislunar space, for example, new space. There is so much innovation and passion in that space. And really and I think that's really the foundation of how we can ensure that, space become like a sustainable thing, right? For exploration, it's really hard to keep up. But if you have an economy that is, relies or based in space, then you will really draw people and resources and investment into the field. And I think we're just at the tip of that, and seeing that really grow, and especially with the many companies that have recently started in the recent years, that's really been a really exciting time to be part of the space industry. Yeah, this is a hard question again, and I had to think. I think about this a little bit sometimes. So, some people might know this, but one of the reasons why I went into medical, so my first degree was engineering and mechanical in space, right? And one of the reasons why I chose to end up in medical school, apart from I was really fascinated with medicine, was that there really was no opportunity in Australia for space back when I graduated, which actually wasn't that long ago. But back then, I think I really I think I was just too scared to kind of like open this box. It's like I knew that in order to pursue that, I need to go out, probably, overseas, or somewhere where I wasn't very comfortable with. And there was a little bit of fear that, oh, look, I can do something else, then I can be equally passionate about that. But I don't think that was true. I really still love space. And so I think I kind of was, I had to go out of my comfort zone, and I didn't want to, and I made up some excuse. But I think if I were to give advice back to me, when I was at that kind of crossroad, would be like, it is scary, may not work, but give it a go, right? Because it can be a really fun journey. And so I would have probably told myself, find people, talk to them, like find out how other people have made their own path, because there are going to be people like you. And most people will be happily help someone out. And that will be the case, regardless wherever part of the industry. You just have to find those people, and those people will guide you and give you confidence, give you suggestions, give you help to reach that next step, so that you feel like you're able to continue on that journey. So I honestly, I was too scared to reach out to anybody back then, but I probably should have reached out to somebody back at that time. I think there's one really topical thing right now, I think, is how do we keep our space activity sustainable? And I think, there's a lot of parts to this, right? But one part obviously that people um, are most fascinated about or can grasp the best is just space debris. And that is really a real risk, I think, for our future if we're not able to really manage how we use the natural resource, which is the space, above Earth. It can really lead to issues down the track. And as there are more players, in the sphere, and we do more activities, like this will eventually get to a problem. And I know there's a lot of people who are working hard on making space sustainability a really critical issue and doing something about it. I know there are companies out there who are doing great work in this area. And I think that's really very much needed because if we're able to have like a sustainable presence, in the future and in space, we can't be doing what we're doing right now on Earth. I think we should really rethink how we do that as we expand out beyond our planet.
You always have to pick up the trash when you're done with your camping trip.